Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 11Zs with CEC. If you've never been to an 11Zs before, these are conversations, very casual conversations with people in our creative network who are doing interesting things, people who we'd like to highlight and kind of learn more about and share with you. So this morning, we are very lucky to be joined by Shah Nazir, who is the founder of Scotland's leading graphic novel publisher called BHP Comics, but it's so much more than that, and we will learn about that today. But really, Shah has been, over the last few years, I've been watching from afar, building sort of an independent empire with a many-headed beast. And it's a really kind of interesting journey from graphic design to large-scale events and everything in between, entirely sort of expanding and supporting the culture of comics. With a dedication to sort of diversifying both authors and stories. And I think the work is really important. It's really interesting, and building so many sort of different things and growing organically and independently is a really sort of inspiring stance to take, and something we can all learn something from. So we're very excited that Shah has made time for us. He has children and a business and a life, but he found a way to sneak us in there, and we appreciate you being here. So thank you, and thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today.
I mean, we really always kick off kind of with everybody's journey, because I think it's so important that, so often people watch these things and they're like, I could never be that. It's so far away. And we all started out on some bumpy country road finding our way to who we are. So I love to kind of hear your journey, all the sort of ping-pongy moments that got you sort of to the start of BHP, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, cool. Weirdly, I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about, because someone asked me a question about why I was quite good at sales. And even I'm not, I don't do sales very often, but I do them every now and then. And I'm this week I'm doing some sales work.
It is the ultimate dream of all creatives, I think, to be good at it. And it's something inherently terrible that we are naturally inherently terrible at. So
Yeah.
I can imagine that's why everyone is looking at you with reverie and excitement.
I guess, I think part of it is just being able to speak to people and read people, and as soon as you can kind of do that, then you can kind of move forward from there. But my sort of work life began in all places, the Barrows in Glasgow, and which is where you guys are housed as well. And I used to have a Saturday job working at a place called MA Sports, which was on the very corner across from where the Celtic pub is, just right next to the old Barrows. And my job was basically to stand behind a counter and mostly sell Adidas Samba, normally in a size 8.
Very specific.
Very specific, and a lot of Germany tops as well. A lot of Germany away tops that were green, and I was just a kid, so I was like 14 or 15.
Are you born and raised Glasgow?
No, I was born in Bristol,
Oh.
and I lived in Pakistan for a couple of years. I lived there for like 2 or 3 years, and then we moved back to Britain, and then we moved up to Scotland. So I've lived in Scotland since I was like 8 or 9 years old. So as a family anyway, and so kind of my first proper job was here, and I think I got paid like £1.10 an hour, right, something like that. So it was, which in the grand scheme of things wasn't that far away from whatever the minimum wage is right now, which I think
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you think about in our lifetime how far salaries have come and expectations of life, it's mind-boggling to think that you and I are old enough that that's the kind of money that we thought was pretty good whack. I thought that was decent cheddar.
Yeah, it was okay. So I did that. So it was a kind of like a sales kind of job, but it was really more just about like supply and demand. So there were people there, and you basically just had to be mindful of people, because as much as I love the Barrows, it's also a sketchy place, and I was pretty green. I was a pretty green sort of 14-year-old going there and seeing things that I'd never seen before, and experiencing people in a way that I'd never really experienced,
To be fair, I still feel that way sometimes in the barrows. I see things I never thought I'd see and experience things I never wished to experience, but it's all in the flavor of the barrows, and I do appreciate it.
Exactly, it's flavor, isn't it? And then and then and then interestingly, like sort of thinking of that sales kind of journey, um, I then got a job working for Slater Menswear, which are like a suit chain. I sell suits and shirts and formal wear and stuff. And their sort of head offices in Glasgow at the back of the St. Enoch Centre. So I had that as a Saturday job when I was at college. I went to go and do illustration at art college, and they yeah, there was a Saturday job, and there used to be a big thing in Glasgow where Thursday nights were a big shopping night. This was before 24-hour shopping, right? So I would like finish college and then go and get dressed and go and change. You have to dress smartly, and then go work like a weird 2.5 hour, 3 hour shift on a Thursday night, which was just, it was ridiculous. And then the Saturday was like a, you know, like a normal Saturday job, like 9 a.m. to like 6 p.m. or something. But it was one of the, I remember it being one of the hardest jobs I ever had, because it was such a, I was so terrible at it. I was really, really bad at it, right? And the
I think
culture,
that's the key to life, right? If you're bad at it, it's hard work.
yeah,
If you're
it
good
is.
at it,
It is.
it's far more satisfaction, return
Yeah,
on investment.
exactly, yeah. And these guys were, their work culture was basically to shout at you. So if you were not selling suits, you got shouted at, and your minimum number of suits that you had to sell a day, I think, was like 7 or 8. That was your sort of target, you know. But you got no commission for that either. You just had to sell that number of suits. And the psychology there is that you would go and you get a customer brought to you. You'd be working a section, and then you'd find that customer size, and you take them to the area of where their suits are. Um, and if didn't think you were going to sell them the suit, or they weren't going to buy it from you, you had to go and tell your floor manager, and then your floor manager would then shout at you a little bit, and then they would get another more experienced salesman to then come in. You would introduce them, say, "Hey, I've got to head off just now. I'm really sorry. I've been asked to go and do work in a different department." You haven't. You just got a bollocking, right? And then the more experienced salesperson would come in and then go and try and recover the conversation and try and push the sale through. And if they didn't do it, then another more experienced floor manager would try and sell them a suit. There was
Can you
3.
imagine being the customer and having this like
Yeah,
barrage of people trying to force you to purchase a suit?
yeah. And it, but
Interesting tactic.
I mean, it was pretty hard, pretty hard. I mean, that was their, it was a very, very, I don't know if they still do that or not, but it's a very old school way of trying to push a sale. You know, it's ABC, always be closing, right? And I still do ABC, right? But without the pressure, you know?
And for more than £1.10, hopefully.
Yeah, right, exactly. And and then I basically learned how to do the job. And kind of over the course of a year, 9 months, I was terrible at it. And I think I stuck at it for like 2.5 years through my kind of college years. And then I got to the stage where it clicked for me, and I understood how to read people, and I understood the conversation that I was meant to have. So if you were coming in with, you know, a wife and kids with her husband, or a mother with like a younger guy, a young man, their son who was getting his first suit, you know who to direct the conversation to, you know, and that's pretty much key to most sales stuff. It's knowing not the person that's buying it, who it's for. It's who's actually spending the money. That's who you're selling the thing to, you know, most of the time.
Decision makers.
Yeah. And then when I kind of figured that out, I then became very good at it, because I also became more confident in how I could speak to people. And then I was their top salesman for the remaining time I was there. You know, I was selling like 25 suits on a Saturday, and I would be the closer. I would then come in and close for other people.
So funny because, you know, like looking back in your life, I'm sure you just thought this is just some job while I'm at art school. I never use these skills. But, you know, they're the underpinning, they're the training. This stuff is always important. It adds up to get you to the finish line.
It's exactly that. It's like whether you're, you know, I never did those kind of jobs where you work in hospitality. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are working in creative arts that work in hospitality, but it's not that dissimilar in terms of how you have to deal with people, how you have to manage people around you. And always, like you say, being able to keep that little seed, and just sort of that sort of, it was hard, but that sort of training kind of made me understand how to work kind of in the bigger world and how to then apply those things, you know?
And simultaneously, you're studying where? Glasgow School of Art?
No, no, I was at, it used to be called, when I was there, it was called Glasgow College of Building and Printing, um,
Sure.
which then became Glasgow, isn't it? Well, Glasgow Met, but it's now Glasgow City College,
Okay.
which is up at the sort of Strathclyde, you know, the very tall building that
Right.
has the
Yeah.
Glasgow, that's where building and printing was.
And you were studying graphic design?
No, I did illustration.
Oh, you did illustration. Sorry.
So, so they were one of the few courses or colleges that did illustration.
Mm.
And my sort of idea was to work in book illustration. That was my sort of my goal. That's where I kind of wanted to be. And then as I was doing that, it was traditional illustration as well. So it was really practical. You know, unlike kind of going to art school, I got into Dundee College of Art, but it was never right for me to just kind of go. And I kind of thought, no, I needed like a more of a fast track for me anyway, you know, at that time. And then, yeah, what the kind of the way that kind of college worked, it was, you got assignments, and it was very much, you got assignments in a work capacity. So you got given an assignment, you had like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever to complete the work, think about it, and then deliver it, and then you get a credit and you get marked on. So it was a little bit like doing a job.
Yeah, it was transactional.
It was transactional. It really was, yeah. And then, but also it was like classical illustration mostly. So I was pencils and ink and watercolors and acrylics and oils and all that kind of stuff. So I learned how to sort of retrain my brain and think more as a classically trained kind of illustrator.
Right.
And then, but while this was happening, the world around us was changing. So the internet had just sort of appeared, and had become a much more prevalent thing around, you know. And like, you know, we used to have an Apple Mac, one of the little small tiny box ones,
Yeah.
in our class. There was like 28 people in our class, and you got half an hour once a week to go and use this,
Better.
right? Which is
Put your floppy disk in there and get to work.
all sorted, right?
Yeah.
And so this was sort of like 96, 97, 98. So this is like 98, 97, 98.
So you're right at the start of it, though.
Yeah, right at the start of it. And basically what happened was that I was like trying to put myself out there to kind of get illustration work. And the sort of long and short of it was that I had trained to do illustration work in the way that people were being hired 5 years previously. And actually now at this point, all of a sudden people were using like mixed media, they were using computer technology, and they were using like digital sort of, you know, like really rough. I mean, you look back at it, it's like not, some of it's not pretty stuff, but it is what it was, you know, for like 3D kind of technology.
Yeah.
For like kind of newspaper illustrations and those kind of things. So what I decided to do, I took a grant out from my college sort of fund, and I bought a desktop PC, and I went to the Barras and got a not real version of Photoshop.
Nice. Back alley.
little back alley Photoshop situation.
Right.
And I bought
the Barras has everything: tube socks, back alley software, what have you.
I don't think they do that anymore, but back then
there's some other version, I'm certain, that they're.
Yeah. And then and then I got a Wacom, which was like an art tablet to basically draw onto the tablet. But you know, the same way as like using a mouse, you kind of look at the screen and.
Yeah, I remember it had like a pen on a cord to your computer, and you'd draw in front of you, and it would show up here.
The drawing area was like this size.
Yeah.
Technology was like this. It's like this big, cream. You know, so like hospital cream.
Pixels.
Yeah. So I got that, and I started basically training myself how to use Photoshop and that kind of stuff, and just doing that on my own time because we weren't being taught that at college. And then a friend of mine who I was actually at school with, who we then were in the same class at college, we decided to just go and set up our own business, just cause.
How revolutionary at the time. Everyone wasn't saying entrepreneur back then.
No, no, I didn't know. I didn't know what that word meant. I didn't really know. I wasn't really thinking that way. Basically, I was looking at opportunity. So I kind of always had a really good eye for composition. So I kind of thought to myself, I was like, well, I know how to make a drawing and how to make a drawing look good. So if I can do that, I can apply it to typography and learn how to do graphic design. So I taught myself graphic design, and bought some books and understood typography. And I was at that cusp because I'd done. In fact, I used to do when I was like sort of 12 to 13. I had a sort of a really small little job working for a newspaper, like a local newspaper, doing cutting and pasting. So I cut and paste. You know, it was in English on one side, and then the other half was in Urdu.
Sure.
Right? So it was, and I couldn't read Urdu either, so I just had to guess. I had to number it for me on the back, so I knew where I was sticking it. But you used to just basically do all the desktop publishing, old school style, and then we used to do the actual placement of print type to then go in. So I kind of learned the very hard way whilst that was kind of going out, and then the digital stuff was coming in. So we taught ourselves. The two of us were both doing illustration. We both taught ourselves graphic design, and then we set up a design agency. So we thought, well, look, right, if a design agency is where we need to go to get illustration work, so we'll create our own design agency to then employ ourselves to do the drawing.
Logical. Yeah.
That was the logical. I mean, like, we're like 21 or something, right?
Yeah.
At the time.
We'll hire ourselves. It's brilliant.
We'll just do it. And then what happened was that that sort of led into graphic design or creative design for the web. Because back then in sort of 98, 99, 2000, the internet was still pretty young, and you could create websites with just really small teams back then anyway. So we had started kind of getting some design gigs, and we got a couple of, like, it was all kind of like word of mouth. We didn't know how to promote ourselves or do any of that kind of thing. It was just going to things and networking, proper old school networking. And then we got some bigger gigs, and we started doing stuff for like STV. We were like a Scottish television channel up here in Scotland, and they used to produce some stuff in house. So one of the funny things that we got a gig for was we used to make the giant checks for the Wheel of Fortune.
Right. Yeah. Like when you win money.
Yeah, the Wheel of Fortune game show. So we'd make the giant check, design the giant checks, print the giant checks, make those. And we got some like other random stuff where we would do like sub design work for other like London agencies. So we did work for like London Fashion Week.
That's really cool though. I mean, you must have been pretty cutting edge, and people,
It was, I mean, I think we were cheap, and I think we were just putting ourselves out there and kind of going, we'll do because we would work like all hours to just do the work and get it. You know,
it took so long to do things back then as well. Like everything was like such an onerous process.
Yeah, I mean, you could come to us on a Friday, and so here's the stuff we want it like tomorrow morning, and we would just do it. You know.
And so, did that get to a level of success? Did it like?
Got to a level of success. We were making like decent money, probably like more money than we should have been making at that time, without the maturity needed to understand what the money meant. So we were both, you know, young guys, so we just do what you do, you know, and you just be silly with it, you know.
Yeah.
And then as we sort of got into kind of, and then we had quite a few clients in America, who then, particularly in New York, we were doing stuff for like ESPN and doing stuff and things like that. But then after sort of 9/11, that all stopped.
So how many years have you been doing this now?
This was maybe like
3 years.
3 years or something. Yeah. Yeah. So sort of by 2001, going into 2002, the internet had also changed and done another little leap, where it was now no longer just, you couldn't just be two guys doing a bit of JavaScript and a bit of HTML, and it was now a much bigger coding job. And we were designing like back-end websites. So one of the first sort of, Edinburgh Woolen Mill, who were owned by Pringle, we designed their first big multi-platform kind of website. And that was a huge gig for us. But it required like so many people. And we kind of got to that stage where by sort of, yeah, the end of 2001, after sort of the kind of, basically people didn't want to deal with me because of my name,
Ah,
and all the sort of ramifications of, of, of the negative connotations of having an Arab-based name. And, um, and then, and then it was also, we kind of got to that stage of it being, for me, it was incredibly boring by that point, because we were then basically, we were doing much more web design work, and I just wasn't interested in, I'm not interested in
that
code.
wasn't what you set out to do.
Yeah.
And also about then, I mean, I was in San Francisco then, and it was .com city, and people
Yeah.
were really, pumping money into big .coms and startups, and people were starting to encroach on your area. I would imagine,
Yeah.
there's a lot more competition than there'd been at the
It was
start.
all of a sudden, yeah, you could sort of, you could feel it and see kind of, but also we were just not experienced, and we didn't have a mentor. We didn't know, we
Yeah,
didn't really know anyone in the kind of field,
interesting.
We were just kind of, I look back at it and kind of think, like, I'm surprised we managed to do anything, you know,
You had a good run, and you had some big
you
clients.
know, so that kind of like, so that gave me a really good grounding of really understand, because we did a lot of design work for
Mhm.
print and digital media, early digital media, and we kind of understood it. And we also did TV. We did a little bit of TV. We did like editing for television as well. We did the Virgin Media. We edited the Virgin Media Virgin Cola adverts. So
Wow,
Virgin
big.
made their own Coca-Cola, right? Their
I
own Cola,
remember it.
right? And with the Roller Cola Girl, and we did one of the first edits for their very first web advert, which was a new thing back then as well. Um, so yeah,
Pretty impressive.
so that's kind of my early, that kind of
It
sort of,
came to a sudden end then.
yeah, it kind of came to an end, and then I kind of just decided, I was like, I'm done. I was like burnt out, and
Well, a healthy dose of racism and a mix of boredom is enough to kind of.
I was like, I'm not doing anything that's fulfilling me.
Mhm.
I'm not kind of happy in this, that kind of place. Was, my old business partner was, he was a techie guy. He was a much more techie guy than me, and he kind of was really, he was into that. He was into numbers. He was into sort of that space. I was like, well, good luck to you, and you carry on doing your thing,
Mm.
and I'll go off and I'll find a different journey.
Cool. So
Uh,
does that bring us to the start of today's life, or was there something in between?
well, no, I did sort of, I spent like a year or like 9 months doing different stuff. I took jobs. I just took random jobs. So I had random jobs working for other people doing like,
Mm.
I worked at Scottish Power doing not debt collection. It was debt consolidation. So you basically had to look at someone's power consumption debt that they had, and then you had to decide whether or not they
Far
were.
more fulfilling than
Oh
your
yeah, so it was horrible. So it's like, could these people afford to pay their bill, or do you just write it off?
So was this like, I need to subsidize myself while I figure out what the next move
Yeah,
is?
yeah. I had no idea what I was doing next. So I was like, I just need to like just work just to get some
Yeah.
extra income in.
So how did you discover what the next big thing was going to be for you? How did that come about?
Um, I think I went to I think I went to the south of France for like
Sure.
6 weeks,
Yeah.
and just camped in the south of France, with my my girlfriend, who would be and eventually become my wife, and we had just sort of hung out.
Spitballed ideas around on the beach.
Yeah, yeah, and just kind of, yeah, just kind of worked it out. And then I came back, and then I found, um, I seen a job working in museums and art galleries, as a learning assistant, and that was at Kelvin Grove Art Gallery Museum, and it was the beginning of their. So this is now 2003, April 2003, and they had, yeah, they'd set up a whole new education department. So I was one of the first people they had to brought on board, and they had all different kinds of creative people to basically be like, come to museums, bring your expertise. Some people have got theater backgrounds, some people have got a 3D sculpting background, and then let's then create like a education program based around museum galleries. And so that was not just Kelvin Grove, that was all of the museums. But I was based at KG, which was then at that point was closed, to be refurbed. So I was then based at McClellan Gallery, so it was Kelvin Grove and McClellan. part of a small team developing stuff. So then I really kind of got into a kind of a I kind of re-educated myself in live interpretation and museum interpretation, and how all of that kind of stuff worked. And I did that for. So I was not just at Kelvin Grove. I also ended up working. I also ended up spending a year being seconded to the Kelvin Grove project. So I worked on the 3D design elements within Kelvin Grove. So the education spaces and some of the gallery spaces, I worked on those. So it was really kind of crossing and mixing my skill base. And I would guess it was at this point that I really then started understanding the value of having different experience and knowing that there just isn't one linear path, you know, that your career path is really, and the options of how you can kind of work and where you can kind of work is a little bit like a multiverse. You know, there's all these little strands.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because I always think if people look at my CV, they're like, are you schizophrenic? And I'm like, no, these things are all totally connected to me. Like, I get it. And they all feed into what makes you an entrepreneur, because you are a jack of all trades and you are wearing all the hats. So you need a wide breadth of skills.
I think so. And I think it's like, I think employers tend to really undervalue it as a skill. Because I went through a few years of like trying to apply for jobs and stuff, and I would normally find that some employers would be fearful or not understand where I was coming from, you know, understand the kind of the value of working.
They prefer boxes. They would like you to just get in one.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. And so within Glasgow Life, I didn't really fit into a box there at all. I was always pushing out, and I was always doing more or thinking outside of that. And it was Glasgow Life is quite a toxic environment to kind of working. Sorry to any Glasgow Life people out there, but you know exactly what I mean, right?
No, you know.
And so I kind of, I still kind of stuck my head above the parapet, and I just said, you know, I'm kind of done here. Thanks for the journey. I've kind of learned everything I need to know. And probably in my last year there, I also started working freelance again for the first time. And I was working freelance outside of my day job. And I was working in like with the Prince's Trust or like Strathclyde Police or community groups. And I was working in pockets in different areas around the city, working in arts education. So I was really into that. And I was really into sort of working with younger people, particularly teenagers, and not just being 2D work, but it being film work, being theater-based work, being performance-based, or anything around that. And really getting that idea into my head of the value of what I learned working in museums, which was the value of using art, any form of art, as a interpretation device to get people into something, to help them learn, you know, without them realizing it half the time. So I kind of really loved that. So I left museums, and then I actually went to another job, which was a part-time job. It was 3 days a week, and that was the Charles Rennie Mackintosh Society. So I worked for them as their education manager for 3 years. I had a 3-year contract with them. And then that gave me more physical time. The other 2 days a week, I was then still doing the evening work, working with kids. And then I was also experimenting, doing a little bit more design work and going back into that field and doing bits and pieces there and thereabouts. And then that sort of took me up to about 2010. And then I felt pretty rounded in terms of what my experience kind of base was for that, you know, for all that kind of stuff.
And at this point, are like ideas brewing? Are you like learning? Are you thinking, I would like to do my own thing? I kind of have all this experience. How can I combine it into something?
No, I wasn't really thinking that at all, like that at all. I was, I mean, in that freelance mindset, you're always thinking ahead to think, what's my next move going to be? Because where am I going to?
How do I feed myself?
How do I feed myself? What's the trajectory? You know, how do I, you know, whereas now, the past sort of 7, 8, 9 years, I'm much, much better at, I plant seeds all the time, and some of them grow and some of them don't, you know? And some of them take 2, 3, 4 years before they come up. You know? whereas that back then I was probably still just, I think because I'd been in a job, I was still much more comfortable, you know.
Mhm.
But what I'd learned from working for Glasgow Life was that I wasn't afraid to walk away.
Mhm.
This is the one thing, the most important thing that Glasgow Life and museums have taught me was the value of myself, and the value that I didn't need a job working for someone else to make money, because I had completely all the skills required to just go and make money myself, to feed myself, you know. And you know, and sort of, and that's kind of the way it is with the pandemic. I had to completely mix things up, and then it's like, well, I've got loads of skills.
Yeah.
Just go and do X, Y, and Z, and I'll make money. You know.
So how does the comic
How does
business?
comics? So basically, what happened? A friend of mine had bought. Well, I tell you what. What happened was is that back in, I was at 18 or 19 in 1993, I think, right? And what I'd done was, I was a comic fan, so I used to read, used to love reading comics, and there used to be little comic fairs or comic marts, and I used to go to those, and I would sometimes sell some old books and flip them for, you know, for some coin, and um, and then I decided when I was 18 that I would run my own comic fair, right? I would do my own one,
Right.
and
So you've always been doing this.
I
Cool.
think so, right? I
Yeah.
think, well,
I
this is,
mean, in little ways, but yeah, it's been
ways
there.
I have, yeah, yeah. In little ways I have. And So I did it with a friend, and we had put this day on, and we didn't call it a Comic Con because I didn't know what a Comic Con was, right? Um, but we had exhibitors, and we had a whole bunch of guests. People paid, I think, 50p or a pound or whatever it was to come enjoy the day. And I did that. So
Did you like list it in a penny saver? That might be a really American term, but like
no, it was like, yeah, it was like, there was like a listing in that you could have in the List magazine back then, and you
yeah,
could
yeah.
have something for free in like the evening times and stuff. And we made some flyers that we didn't even get printed. We were so green, right? I didn't even get printed. I photocopied
Nice. Yeah.
flyers, right, and then cut them. You know,
That's how I used to do my parties. Yeah. Hand drawn and then photocopied.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember we designed it on an Amiga 500.
Fancy.
I know, right? So I'd done that, and that was cool. That was fine. And then when this friend of mine in sort of 2007, 2008 had said to me, he'd bought like, I think 20 or 30 long boxes of comics. So a long box of comics is basically like, there's like 300 or 400 like floppy
Oh, wow.
comics in a box. He bought them from another collector. So he was like, I'm going to sell these. I was like, well, you're not going to stick them all on eBay. He was like, no. And he was like, Sean, he goes, you used to do these comic things. Can you help me run a comic fair? And I was like, Dave, I'm not really interested in doing that. It wasn't something that I'd ever considered. So there's not very much money in
Like,
it.
I'm a grown up now, so
Yeah, right. And I just started watching Lost. I really want to finish, right?
got some serious shit on the go. I don't know if I can say.
And he was like, "Oh no, come on, please, and he was like, because basically he wanted me to do something to help him, or he wasn't very good at organizing anything. So he was like, could you basically organize it?
Just so I can sell my comic books.
I could sell my comic books, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I started running comic fairs again. And I did 2 a year, and I said, well, I'll only do it if it's free for people to come to, because nobody wants to pay a pound or whatever to come in and then buy comic books from a flea market, basically,
Mhm.
right? He was like, well, that's fine, yeah, that's cool, I'm cool with that. And then so I found a little space. So Hillhead Library has a little room upstairs. So I used to hire that room out, and you could fit like 22 tables or something in there. And he knew a bunch of people. We sold the tables, put some advertising up and around, flyers and posters and stuff. And we did 2 of them a year, and people would come to them. There'd be they'd be up to like 1,000 people sometimes, And because it was Byers Road, people would just wander in.
Yep.
They would come buy stuff, So I did that up until sort of 2010, thereabouts. I did like 2 year. All the guys were like, "Oh, you should do more. You should do more." So I don't want to do more. Just like,
Just a little hobby side thing.
yeah, it's just like a bit of fun, And then sort of 2011, I had, oh yeah, so I kind of was working freelance after I finished the museums, not finished with the Macintosh. And then I wrote a kid's book on Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And then it was writing the kid's book that then started giving me the kind of the hankering and feeling to want to make my own stuff.
Yeah.
And that was then really kind of pushing me, because this was sort of a follow-on from the sort of arts interpretation education things I'd written over the years. And then this was a slightly more personal thing, and this was much more, I was making for the first time a product,
Mhm.
whereas I was writing resources before, Um,
Much more satisfying.
yeah, right. And so then I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And then a couple of my friends and my friend that had bought all those comics um, he had started making his own comic, and he was like doing this thing, but he didn't have any design experience, and he was like, well, I was like, well, I'll help you, Dave. I said, I don't mind. I'm looking for something else to sort of fulfill.
Dave, you're like an anchor man. I'm
Right.
always coming to help you.
So I had, so basically, I mean, he didn't even draw the full pages. He had them as like pieces cut up. So I had to collate everything for him. And then I basically desktop published it for him,
Mhm.
designed a logo and did all those kind of things. And it was him that called it. I was like, well, let's stick a label on it. What do you want to call it? He was like, well, let's call it Black Hearted Press. I was like, fair enough. Right. Let's do that, and then that's what it sort of became. He did that. We made it, and then the sort of by 2011, the sort of opportunity kind of arose. I was like, well, I used to work at the Macintosh Society. I know the building, the Macintosh Church inside out. I was like, I got this idea to do a Comic Con, like a little mini comic festival. So I
Yeah.
went to Stuart, who's the director of the society, and said, Stuart, I want to do this. I said, we'll split the money, whatever we make, and we'll just see how it goes. And he was like, yeah, let's go for it. And it was not how people would experience a Comic Con now, but back then, you could only sell 500 tickets, so we sold 500 tickets in like a week.
Wow.
And it was a small hall for exhibitors, so there was maybe like 20 exhibitors, and because of the pews and the style, it sort of lent itself to being like a big auditorium for people to just listen to and learn about comics. And really, kind of my rationale there when I started doing that was, I then by this point David made his book, and then I'd made my first comic myself, which was this little black and white, funny kind of comic, and I thought, oh, there's nowhere to sell it, there's nowhere to do
Yeah.
anything like that. So I was like, well, let's do our own Comic Con. Going back to this kind of where I was thinking about when I set up my design company, I was like, well, let's just do a Comic Con, and then we'll then have a little audience, so we can sell some comics, and we can have a laugh and have a drink while we're doing it, and that's kind of where kind of BHP and where comics really kind of grew and kind of came from those moments right there.
So that is an incredible foundation on which to say it is now quite a big empire of events, big events,
Yeah.
and also publishing house, basically.
Yeah. I mean, we're still small. We're still, I mean, you say it's like empire, but it's like,
I mean, it's like a multifaceted,
yeah. I mean, I've still got probably the same mentality that I feel that you need to have like fingers in various pies, and you always need to be adapting and moving and
yeah, especially at the minute. I think diversifying and being like, okay, people are sitting home reading comics, they're not coming to events. How can we balance things?
yeah. So what the kind of first Glasgow Comic Con did for us was it re-established, because there hadn't been a Comic Con in Scotland for like 15 years prior to that, and there was only one in Scotland, I think, up in Inverness a couple of years before. So there wasn't anything at that point. So it was not just a catalyst for me, but it was a catalyst for lots and lots of people across the kind of central belt, and particularly in the country, where within that sort of first 2 years, we went from having sort of 5 small press independent people exhibiting their work to all of a sudden it being 20 or 30, and you're like, wow, that's weird. There's like, all of a sudden there's all these people who are making their own stuff, and now they want to go and sell it.
Yeah.
And they want to meet people. So after this, so by the third year, we'd moved to the CCA, and then we spent, I think, 2 or 3 years at the CCA and the art school until we outgrew both of those buildings. And then we went to the concert hall, which we spent. I think we had 3 or 4 years there up to the sort of pandemic. And it sort of didn't just kind of really kind of mushroomed in it being, for us, it was what would become BHP Comics was then integral to sort of the growth of Comic Con, because then we had our own platform to sell direct to our attendees, and even though we're like still small, it's still like 2,500 people or that kind of thing. We're selling one of our books to one out of every 4 customers is buying one of our books.
That's huge. Good return.
Yeah, and it's just like, so the investment for us as the organizer and as the publishing house making that is really, really good.
So can you give me the kind of USP for BHP Comics and the USP for the events company, which is now Acme? Is it?
Yeah, so it's two different things there. Yeah, so Glasgow Comic Con is still owned by BHP Comics.
Okay.
So that's still firmly part of BHP because it's holistically sort of built in.
Yeah, it's the distributor for the publishing.
Yeah. And because it's a pure comics only event, we don't mix media or do any of that kind of stuff. It's just it's there as the education tool to get people, it's the giant workshop to get everyone kind of go, cool, I want to take part in this, and then learn about comics, and then I'll also buy some more books, and begin reading more, and so it's that kind of thing, trying to get the culture of people buying and reading comics,
and making them as well. So
and making them as well.
So
yeah.
this is your education training in the museum sector.
Yeah. Because then you have we've got all that sort of the infrastructure, basically the education program that happens alongside it. Mm-hmm. Is there to basically encourage people and give them that little spark. But also just by being in the environment, you then see other people making stuff, and you're like, oh, well, I've got some of those skills. I can do that thing. I can see,
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of that mirroring, which is happening, which we weren't lucky enough to have before. That didn't exist for us. But it's like, well,
kind enough to pay it forward.
Yeah, I can pay it forward, right? So, so it's kind of cool, and I think what was nice is that over these years, I then seen people who part of their story was as they were attendees, and then they then became exhibitors and became comic authors and comic writers themselves, and have got their own great journey.
A nice evolution.
Yeah, just because of that thing. And then BHP was Black Hearted Press for probably the first couple of years, 2-3 years of its life, where it was basically 3 people who all had completely different ideas, and we just had a label on something. And then as we were sort of progressing it, the other 2 guys I was working with didn't really want to sort of be part of, like, they wanted the company, but they didn't want to do any of the work that you had to do.
Yeah. I mean, Dave never wanted the hard work. Let's be fair. He just wanted to sell his comics.
Yeah, right. He did. No, and absolutely did. Even though he didn't really want to sell his comics either. Bless Dave. All he wanted to do was draw them.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's just like,
have to sell them in order to make the next one. That's just how it goes.
I know, and he's still making that same. He's redrawn the book. He's kind of gone back and then he's doing it, another iteration of it. So.
So it evolved from Black Art Press to BHP Comics.
It evolved, yeah. So it was.
And now you have to do all the work.
No, I've got to do all the work. Yeah. So it was, yeah. We stayed sort of as Black Art Press for a couple of years, and then we sort of I then changed it to BHP because I was like, well, I never came up with the name in the first place, and I always found Black Heart too negative a name. And it wasn't really what I had begun starting to do. So it wasn't until about 2016, sorry, that I then started looking at other people and thinking, oh, we can publish other people's work. We're not just self-publishing our own independent things anymore. And I think that was the thing with the other 2 guys. They didn't want to publish other people's work. Well, I was like, well, we've got the beginnings of something here. I think for us, it feels right. That's the right move, and they were like, no, we don't think it's going to work. I was like, well, that's cool. Let's just split. You guys do your thing. I'll keep this and keep sort of pushing it forward. And then, so then we picked up our first kind of couple of things to kind of publish and make us floppy comics. And then about 2017, 2017, I then went to London Book Fair for the first time. And then I sort of got this whole new education about how the book market works. And then I understood how publishing to a much more international and broader scale kind of worked. So I kind of took myself back to school for that. And then that made me then realize how we could shift the sort of comic publishing kind of model, because it's very weak in the UK in terms of how it kind of works. You're never going to be strong enough to be able to compete with the way that floppy comics works in the US. You know, I think if we were based in New York or Seattle, we'd be flying. You know, in terms of what our reach could be, but without someone physically there, it's just impossible to kind of do. So so one of our biggest issues was never having shelf life as well. So people would never really take floppy, like independent floppy comics, and put them on the shelf. Or if they did, they would go in a small press section if you were a comic store, or they would stick it in with everyone else, and you'd be stuck next to Batman. Who wants to buy my book when they could just buy Batman? You know, at the end of the day. So then I was like, well, if I then started thinking about books, and then thinking, well, you have a spine, you then have a spine language, you then have shelf life. And it meant that all of a sudden our distribution could really open up, because then you can be in much more places. And you could be in many different types of store. You don't have to just be in a bookstore on a high street. You can also be in a gift shop specialist. You can be in all these kind of things. So it was kind of understanding that, and that epiphany for me, and then realizing that that's how I could then begin kind of growing BHP as a publishing house anyway, up to then. So we're probably up to like 2018. And that's when I decided to like change the name. I think we changed the name legally to just BHP Comics, and then the meaning for BHP changed to Bold Heart Press, because then it much more reflected what we were doing, and sort of my ambitions.
And when did that simultaneously happen, that the focus was on new voices and sort of diverse authors?
That sort of came in thereabouts, about 2017, 2018. And I just kind of thought, that was me just getting a feeling of what was happening around me, and understanding that, and me going to like all these different publishing events, and pretty much very often being in a room, normally in Edinburgh, with publishing people, and there being 300 people, and there being like less than a handful of brown faces or black faces, and that being really prevalent. And then just within comics itself, there being so few people of color.
Yeah.
You know, for many years, it was just me. And there's another guy called Padam Singh, who's a comic artist who doesn't really do very much anymore, but he used to do stuff for a thing called Electric Soup, which was quite a famous independent, sort of like Viz, but a Scottish Viz. That had a couple of very famous people come out of it. But that was the only person I knew. There was no one else. You know,
it's such a tricky thing, because I think, you know, it had to be you. It had to be a representative of the community to do it. Otherwise, I think it's really not useful. It doesn't have the same impact when you're doing it to, like, I keep seeing these things on Creative Scotland that are like really aggressively trying to reach out to this audience, but not by the audience itself. So it's always a mismatch. So it's really lovely when it's own voices reaching out to their own community to do something authentic.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of like, and we did a thing called the Full Color Project, which allowed us to kind of do a first kind of dip our toe in the water, working with Creative Scotland and doing some sort of mentoring and finding some voices that are people of color to like write and draw, but it had no parameters other than you were under like a certain age limit. And to really just allow people to just sort of be free, and just, it was the experience, you know. So that had lots of pros and cons, and then coming out of that, going into sort of last year and into this year, my kind of decision to sort of change up how BHP was running as a comics publisher,
As a response to the pandemic, or just generally?
as a response to the pandemic, yeah, and also Brexit. because we were selling directly. We were selling a lot of books, into mainland Europe. So people would go to our website and directly buy a comic, which is a graphic novel, which was great. But as of January last year, the sort of price had kind of gone up from, it was about 40% hike at least in shipping, so we've really seen a downturn in our number of direct sales to like Germany and France and those kind of places, where people are just not buying the same kind of stuff, and just shipping in general has just gone up so much more. So it physically costs more. Yeah. So shipping was a deciding factor in making some of the decisions we've made. Um, and also the fact that what we were doing, we'd started exporting into the USA back in sort of late or early 2019. And really, the COVID really ruined that for us. So, just as a small example, we had the way that the book market works, which is brutal, but is the way that the book market works, is that they don't pay for anything in advance. So everything is on sale or return, but they put an order in. So you still got to spend the money. You've got to spend the money making the books, shipping the books, and with our international sort of exports to the US and Canada, our distributors based in LA, and they'd like taken decent orders for like some of our books, and then this was sort of in February time, so they had all been fulfilled to then go out to Barnes and Noble, and then by April of 2020, Barnes and Noble had returned like 90% of our stock, which was just like, you just can't do anything about it. And for some of those titles, it was just the end of the line for them, because it meant that, I mean, normally you would get between 10 and 20% of a return, which is like completely understandable. But what we were relying on is those books being in space, then we could then market them and do all that kind of stuff. But it just completely killed it. So for me, I was like, well.
And was that because people weren't going into stores?
Yeah, there was, yeah, because they closed all the stores. So I think they initially closed the stores, and I think from the sort of the financial perspective, they were then looking at the stock they had and thought, well, who's going to ask for an indie publisher that they don't know?
Yeah.
Right. Let's
Keep
offload.
searching for that online.
Let's offload all of those stocks, right? And let's go, well, here's the new Dan Brown, or here's the new, whatever book that's a famous book. That's the stock we'll keep, which I totally get and understand that. So, but for us, it was pretty damaging. So between that, so basically all of our US stock, a lot of it we've had to pulp and recycle, which is like thousands of dollars of stuff, because once you've kind of gone out of that cycle, it's really hard to sell backlist books, which is why being in the UK, and having a certain amount of stock in the UK, when we were running events, we have a bunch of our own stock, so we go and do other people's Comic Cons, we attend stuff, we sell like 60 or 70% of our sales annually are from us selling direct to market, so that kind of I think for me solidified, well, let's just change up a little bit what we're doing. We're committed to make a couple more books within a series, but let's do more digital stuff. Let's experiment more. We'd already been, from sort of late 2019, we'd already been moving more towards film and television content and developing some of the ideas that we have into film and television content. So then, because of the kind of pandemic and everything else, I was like, well, let's make some floppies. Let's go old school again, right? Let's make some floppies that are staple bound, smaller comics. They're easier to ship. They're lighter to ship. It won't cost as much physically to make.
I think people find that comforting now.
Yeah.
Like, there's a real hearken to our past during the pandemic. I watched a lot of old movies just because they were comforting. I knew how it was going to go. I wasn't ready for surprises.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. And I think it's the same with like a lot of our stuff. It's like, it's great to go and discover, but unless we've already got fans that are, we have a few hardened fans. Thank you for those ones that are around, but there are far and few between, really. So, so it was like, we're not that comforter for people,
Yeah.
we're a neat, cool new discovery,
What
So
place?
yeah, yeah. So the idea being now is that what we're doing is we're doing a range. So we created a range of books. So we have like 4 comics that we make as floppies, and that gets released as a range each year. So for the next 2-3 years, we'll have a short range, and then within this first batch that we've got, which is 4 titles, we created the concepts and all the characters and the Bibles of what the stories are, because we've done that in the same way that we basically sat down and said, if we were going to make some TV shows and some cool comics, what do we want those things to be?
Mm.
We did, and then we thought, well, we've got this. Let's go and speak to Creative Scotland and let's see if we can get some funding so that we can basically do like an extension of what the Full Color project was, but basically go out and find people of color who are writers and artists within Scotland and the UK in the most, and to get them on board, and people who are new or emerging, you know, and that's what we ended up doing. We have 8 new people, you know,
That's exciting.
new and emerging. They're either just they're like into web comics, or this, for most people, this would be their first print book, and we just found the right people, you know. We just put some call outs on Twitter, and there's some people that I knew through other people who I then just went and scouted and found. And then we've basically got these great new people who then we're mentoring, you know, to make the work, and to put them in the right place, and then give them that as a cool platform. And then for us, we get some nice, cool books as well at the end of it.
Yeah.
And then also we then get to do 3 different things with those books as well. So we get to, yes, there'll be floppy comics, which we can do as lower runs, which allows us to basically not have to sit on so much stock. We get to collect the whole thing as a book, trade book, which means you can put it into bookstores. We get to publish it digitally. I'll do that in an hour. We get to publish it digitally, and then we've also got a body of work that allows us to develop our TV pitch documents as well.
So the TV pitch side of things, that's new. Is that somewhere you've got skills in?
No, that's just another learning curve.
All right.
That's just
keeping it fun.
It's keeping it interesting. So yes, we set up BHP Studios, and me and Gary Chudley, who I'm running that with, we've been experimenting the past kind of few years, and just kind of we were going to pitch meetings and film festivals and that kind of thing, and BHP sold one of our comics as an option to be made into a TV show. So that kind of gave me like a bit of a taste for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we've just in December we just filmed a pilot for a documentary that we'd like want to go and get made. So so that's quite exciting. But then we've got all this kind of great stuff, and we've got loads of interesting new contacts as well within that book, that kind of world. But I think what was happening was that TV people were coming to us. They were asking us,
that's great,
as a publisher, like, what stuff have you got for ideas, you know? And it wasn't just small companies, it was like big production companies. So it's like, well, we need to sort of tool up,
yeah,
to get ourselves up into that right space. And then, you know, we'll see what happens. But it's quite interesting. But it's kind of one of those things that sits quite nicely parallel along with kind of what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's a natural progression on another revenue stream.
Yeah.
So on the Acme side,
yeah,
what's cooking over there?
So for Acme, my business partner for that is David Bell, and we started running Rycon, which is an anime and manga convention, back in 2016. So he came to me. He was actually an exhibitor at some of my events, like an anime specialist. He was like selling anime things, and he said he really wanted to run a manga sort of anime convention, and would I be interested in sort of doing that with him? So it took us a while to sort of feel around one another and get our feet, and find out who does what, and then we eventually found the right venue, we found the right name, and then we started producing those anime shows, which were, we're doing 2 a year, one in spring, one in sort of winter, and small audience of like 2 to 2.5, maybe 3,000 people per event. But they're just 1 day shows. They're just really neat and tidy. And we kind of, up until 2019, I think we'd produced 8 or 9 of them in 4 years, I think. So it kind of grown really solidly. And we kind of understood what we're doing. And then what happened was over the pandemic, MCM Comic Con, or MCM Scotland Comic Con, who were owned by Read Pop, Read Exhibitions, who run London Book Fair, New York Comic Con, London Comic Con, all these kind of things. They pulled out of the SEC venue to run their show here. So the opportunity for us came to basically go, well, here's the bit where we do our leap. It's like a massive leap, but it's like we can, as an events company, we can really step up and jump out of being a boutique show to being a national kind of show. So we ended up working it all out, and we ended up signing a 3-year contract, and we're doing 2 shows a year at the SEC. So the spring show is slightly smaller. It's in Hall 1 and Hall 2 of the SEC, so it's more kind of maybe like 80,000 attendees or so. And the September show is on the exact same weekend that MCM's old Scotland Comic Con used to be on. So it's for muscle memory for people. Really nothing has changed apart from just different people are running it.
So has Scotland got this massive comic fan base? It feels like it would.
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, it's like, it's like comic fans. It's like fans of pro wrestling, fans of,
they're big here.
Yeah, there's like all the sci-fi stuff. There's like an artist alley. We've got, because of my links to the book world, I'm bringing in like publishing houses to come and have like a sci-fi book publishers selling direct to market, and having young adult and children's book authors as part of the kids section. So it's kind of it's a really multimedia kind of show, the bigger one, because there's loads of space. It's like Hall 4 at the SEC is massive, but it's creating just basically that giant day out. And I was, there was a bit of me years ago where I was like getting bored of running Comic Cons and doing that kind of stuff. And then as my boys got older, and as like the smaller one, the bigger, well, he was small then, but as he got bigger and he started coming to things, I was like, oh, this is like, it kind of put me back in love with it for them, because
seeing it through their eyes,
seeing what the kind of thing they want to see and they want to do. So being a parent really helps. Being a parent really lets me see, because we go to stuff, we take our kids to stuff all the time, right? And it's like what things work and what things don't work, and where the value is in things, so it's trying to find that, and it being fun and cool and also educational, kind of under the line for people as well, so that's where we're at.
Cool. Well, congratulations. It's all really nice. I mean, it's coming together beautifully, so it doesn't sound like the pandemic has taken you too far off track, which is nice.
No, like it did. I think it kept kicking me about a bit, and then it's just, there was a point where I couldn't physically work because of having small kids, but you just had to kind of go, right, well, let's slow everything right back down, and let's not take so much on, and just be much more selective about what those income choices are. Mm-hmm. And then what are the choices of the seed projects, which you don't get paid for? What are those? And be much more selective of what those seed projects are.
So with all the varied experience and all the sort of refining, and also with the kind of where you've ended up and kind of what your values are and the focus of the business, what kind of, any top tips, any advice for aspiring publishers, aspiring comic book makers, people looking to work with diverse audiences, or, people just kind of facing the challenges of the pandemic and having to pivot?
Advice is just, I don't have anything pithy for you. So it's just.
Well, I feel like you're real, like what's so inspiring about your story is you have on multiple occasions gone, well, these are my skills. I'm just going to do this shit. I'm just going to get on with it.
Yeah.
And you've done that beautifully.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it though. I think it's like recognizing in yourself the things that you can do and the things that work for you, and then just being like a little bit aware of everything that's around you, and how things can sort of change, and not being frightened. Like, one of the things I find with particularly some younger people that I've mentored and stuff, where they've come from a background where if they don't get paid for something, they don't see any value in it. And it's like, well, no, there's a massive difference between someone exploiting someone for work and you taking the time and effort to plant seed work and put, high five yourself in 5 years time because you did that stuff
Yeah.
back then.
And actually recognize what you're taking away from this. Like,
Yeah.
you actually add no value to me. It's taking a huge amount of time to help you out.
Yeah.
That's why you're not being paid. And it's okay for you to use this as a learning experience and put that in your tool belt and apply it later on.
It's not exposure. It's like, there's this whole thing of like negativity against exposure, and I totally get it.
Yeah.
But it's not exploited. You yourself, if you can do something for yourself to enable yourself to be better, and really at the core of being an entrepreneur has to be, you've got to be an enabler for yourself to help yourself overcome stuff and recognize, yes, I've got to pay bills and do things, so these are the things I have to do for that, but here's the other things I have to do to plan for the future, which I won't get paid for just now, but if I don't do them, I know that I won't get that payday later.
And have a friend like Dave who keeps needing you to do stuff.
Have a little have people around you that give you a little nudge now and then. Yeah, have those people. They're important. Yeah, I know it's a shame I don't really see Dave anymore. I haven't seen him since pre-pandemic.
Like, I need to know Dave. Like, he's a big part of this story.
He's lovely. He's so nice. Yeah.
Well, it's brilliant. I'm so pleased that it's all happening, and it feels really from such a good place and such a nice organic journey, and helping some really interesting people find a platform. So that's brilliant.
Thank you.
And,
so check out the we're running a Kickstarter, so
okay.
Pre-order our books for this range of books and to support these.
Go on, give us the links and the spiel.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, cool. So I think that's going to run from the 4th of March or the 2nd of March, something like that. So that's coming up quite soon. Then you'll be able to find that you find the link on our Twitter pinned tweet situation.
Tell us your Twitter handle so we can
find it. It is at BHP Comics.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone check that out. You can get new up and coming emerging talent comic books before anyone.
Yeah, it'll be 6 months before they're in stores as well. So it's really putting that pre-order system that Kickstarter allows you to do and really put it in place, because the work's already almost complete. So we just got the covers coming in this week, and that's been really exciting seeing. And all the scripts, all but one, I just had a script come in just there, so we're just about to sign them off.
Oh, brilliant. So exciting. Cool. Well, listen, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your journey. It's always so interesting to hear from people. Next month, we have Jamie Enley coming on 11Zs to talk about thoughtful leadership, and he does incredible work with working with huge corporates to get their leaders to kind of talk to each other to change the world, and to filter down like really emotional change and holistic change throughout huge organizations. So he's a really interesting guy. So come and join us again next month. And you can always look through our history, our library of all these brilliant conversations, and find folk who appeal to you and learn some things and be inspired. And maybe one day be a guest on 11Zs. But anyway, stay tuned, visit us, check out the other things we have, and Shah, come back again.
You're welcome. Very welcome. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Cheers.